Mac guys here on Birds 365. We're joined by Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast, who looks like he's ready for winter. He's got a turtleneck on. Are you ready for winter there, Andrew?
I'm ready, man. It's dreary out here, Jody.
Yeah, it's dreary. It's a little chilly out today. It's been a ping pong like week. Cold, hot.
Craziness.
Yeah. Craziness. I like that, Andrew. All right. Craziness of the Eagles bye week. We'll start there. Scout time. Andrew DiCecco, South Scout and the Eagles. What are you fixing first if you're Nick Sirianni and company?
Well, I got a few things, John. I would say red zone efficiency, which I think has gotten a little bit more fluid. It's started out a little bit rough. Brian Johnson starting to find his way a little bit. Turnovers, both defensively, you would like to see them come up with more. That's what made them such a dynamo last year. And I also think that protecting the football, Jalen Hurts, I believe, had 15 total turnovers last season, 9 interceptions, 6 fumbles, and he has 12 right now. And the running backs, Kenny Gainwell and DeAndre Swift, combined for 5 fumbles. Miles Sanders had 2 last year. So it's uncharacteristic, really, of a Nick Sirianni team. So those are certain things that when you don't have the depth, John, when health hasn't been on your side, you have to make sure that you clean up if you want to take down some of these Goliaths that you're going against in the coming weeks.
All right. I don't know that we mentioned Kenny Gainwell once, that maybe throwing the ball at the backside of the backfield. I don't think we've had you on. I know we haven't had you on since the coach confused me on how he feels about Kenny Gainwell, because Gainwell had a bad fumble against the Commanders. So someone asked him his press conference, why do you continue to use Kenny in high leverage positions? And the coach got his nose out of joint a little bit. Every time I pull somebody, when they make a mistake, I'd have to pull Jalen Hurts. I'd have to pull A.J. Brown. So he's comparing Kenny Gainwell to A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts. Really, coach? But he did. He went there. So then last week, they give it to him in the red zone. He makes a nice run, hurdles over a guy into the end zone. Looks good. All right, we've annexed the jigs of Kenny down by the goal line. And then they give him 2 more carries the rest of the game. Does the coach love Kenny Gainwell, or doesn't the coach love Kenny Gainwell? Should I be pointing the finger at Brian Johnson, or is this a Nick Sirianni thing? Where is Kenny Gainwell in the mind of the coaches right now?
I think they really like him, to be honest with you. I think that they're still trying to find a good rhyme or reason. I mean, if you look no further than last season, Boston Scott was kind of like a spin the wheel. He would randomly get carries inside the goal line, maybe 2 carries, and then you wouldn't see him the rest of the game. I don't know that there's some sort of a formula to how they deploy their running backs, but it is really curious. But I do know that, and John can attest to this, that Kenny Gainwell is their situational preference. They do trust him. And that one blip, yes, it was crucial. It could have been costly, but it didn't deter them from relying on him, and it won't moving down the stretch here.
Andrew, we've been talking about this all week, and I want to get your thoughts on it, because at some point, I just got to give it up and say the Eagles are just not that good when it comes to running the football traditionally, what we think of, and obviously they're not under center. So in their case, they're a gun team for the most part. So you have the running back offset. You just kind of hand it off to them. They're not good at that. Can we say that definitively, or are there other issues? Cam Jurgens not being a right guard. I happen to think that Jalen Hurts' impact is the big problem on the running game. Are the running backs that good as a group?
So a little bit to unpack here, John. So I would say Mike Gill, our friend Mike Gill, asked me this question yesterday on Football at 4. I think it's a multi-layered reasoning for why the Eagles running game hasn't really been able to catch fire as of late. And Cam Jurgens is a big loss. Cam Jurgens was I thought he really acquitted himself well at the right guard spot and took to that really well. But that's not to say that he's the sole reason why the running game hasn't been able to sort of get any sort of traction and consistency. I think the loss of Jalen Hurts being that +1 that defenses had to be honest for, not having him out there is completely detrimental to the running game. Teams are able to play them differently, and you're seeing that. And I just think that the running back situation in general, they have the group right now, I think, is better than what they had last year. I think DeAndre Swift at his core, at his best, is a better player than Miles Sanders. So I don't know that, and that's not saying that they're great, but I think that they're good enough where they should be able to get some semblance of a running game. Maybe not the 175 yards that you saw week 2, but certainly 80, 90-yard rushing games shouldn't be out of the realm of possibility.
But we all acknowledge that the Eagles' passing game is better than their running game. Eagles' passing game can be put up against any other passing game in the National Football League. We saw Flores do it in week number 2 and just say, "Oh yeah, I'm dropping everybody. No, you're not going to throw the ball for 350 yards against us. We're going to dare you to run the football." So they did, and Swift went off, and the Eagles won the game. Nobody else has gone there since. Will someone go there before the season is over and say, we just need to do it better than Flores did? We need to conceal it better, hide it better, adjust better. Will someone dare the Eagles to run the football in a game between now and the end of the year, the way the Vikings did?
I don't think so. I mean, depending on what the knee situation is moving forward, they may say, hey, look, we want you to stand back there in the pocket and can see if you can continuously beat us with your arm. Right. I think that,
and Jalen hadn't been able to do that the last couple of weeks. He's picking the snot out of everybody.
Yeah,
Why?
And that's what makes this team even more. I'm more impressed with how they've been able to win versus last year. They've been able to cruise to victories. This year, they have to find different ways to win. Jalen Hurts had to redefine how he's been able to play the position. Different key players have to step up in crucial moments to win these games. So I think that you're going to see teams continue to play the Eagles the way that you've seen it and say, can you continuously beat us with your arm versus, hey, okay, let's see if they can run the ball on us.
Eagles are 8-1, Andrew, 27 consecutive regular season weeks. They have been either the best record in football or tied for the best record in football. Yet there's a bunch of people, I'm told daily, nationally, that don't believe in this team. And, when I start to think about it, I say, how could you be that other than being a hater, blah, 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 other than being a Cowboys fan, blah, blah, blah. But I look at this pass defense, and our buddy Paul Domowitch broke down the numbers. Over the last 3 games, this is scary, Andrew. 27 of the 91 pass completions. So first of all, they're giving up 30 pass completions a game. That's scary enough. Against the defense have been for 15 yards or more. The Eagles are dead last in giving up explosive plays, 15 yards or more, 65 this season. They gave up 76 all of last season when the defense was terrible. This scheme is designed to limit explosive plays, and they can't limit explosive plays. Is that simply going to be fixed when Bradley Roby shows up and Kevin Byard gets more comfortable, or do we have a serious issue here?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at last season's secondary, John, they gave up an average of 179.8 passing yards per game. Now that's about 257, if I'm correct on that. I don't know that it's as simple as plugging in Bradley Roby and hoping that Kevin Byard finds his footing and acclimates to Sean Desai's scheme. James Bradberry's really struggled this year. Uncharacteristically, it's been a pretty steep drop-off. He was an all-pro last season, committing egregious penalties. Just some teams are finding ways to beat him deep. Speed is not his forte. He's been able to win largely being an instinctual, smart player. Darius Slay, I think, has been phenomenal. He's been a lot more physical this year, coming up and making tackles on players. Reed Blankenship, I think, has exceeded expectations largely, aside from that Commanders game.
Yeah,
but
one game.
But I think it's a multi-layered problem here when it's not just the slot cornerback position. I think the lack of continuity at safety has really impacted the team. The pass rush hasn't gotten home with consistency. You're seeing it late in games when they really have to have it. But I think coverage and pressure, they work in hand, and they haven't
cover and rush are wise, man.
Like JG said. So I mean that they definitely work in concert. So there's a lot of things at play here, and I don't know that getting Bradley Roby back and hoping that Kevin Byard rounds into form is going to be enough to fully patch that secondary.
As we led up to the trade deadline, Andrew, John and I agreed on something, but for varying reasons. We both agreed that Derek Barnett would not be traded. John said it was because he thought the Eagles actually value the 8 snaps a game he plays. I said it was because nobody will even give him an upgrade around a pick for a deal leading into the trade deadline. Well, he's still here. And last week he got a DNP coach's decision. Healthy scratch, did not play. Is Derek Barnett going to do anything between now and the end of the year? Or is this, if the Eagles get in a roster crunch and they have some issues with the roster, is Derek Barnett a release candidate?
Well, I heard you talk about that. Him being inactive on Monday, he seemed he seemed not surprised by that.
Not me.
I think they like the depth there on the defensive line, and Derek Barnett's never been a high sack player. He's someone that they can rely on. He started, I think, 45 games in this league. They don't really have much beyond Brandon Graham. They're trying to preserve Brandon Graham for the final stretch of games in the postseason. He's only played 28% of the snaps, and Nolan Smith has yet to really establish himself. So I think they want fresh legs as you advance into the colder months here, and the games really start to matter. So having a guy like Derek Barnett to occupy some snaps and alleviate some of the pressure from Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick, who have really seen an uptick in snaps, I think is going to be beneficial. But I wouldn't suddenly expect him to be this player that gets 2-3 sacks in critical moments late in the season. I don't think he'll be a release candidate, knowing how valuable pass rushers are in this league and defensive ends with that kind of experience.
No, I think Kansas City will tell you all you need to know. If he's a healthy scratch, yeah, the Eagles have kind of pulled the plug. They're not going to cut him, but they've kind of pulled the plug. But I would, and Andrew, savvy football reporter he is, knows the Eagles were freaked out, as I mentioned, by the Cowboys special teams, and they were concerned about special teams. And there's a reason they elevated Ben Sumren out of nowhere. And also Patrick Johnson was a big part of their special teams until they couldn't find a way to dress him because they had the roster crunch, the game day roster crunch. And all of a sudden he started being inactive. And I know you were surprised by that, Andrew. They wanted special teams players for John Fossil and that special teams group. If it continues in Kansas City, then I'll say, yeah, they've kind of, and by the way, I think they should, I think that's one of the underreported stories. They can't, Nolan Smith needs to step up a little bit.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's starting to concern me for a couple of reasons. One, anytime you talk to Nolan, he's got this thing on his shoulder. He gave that famous quote, "It's my baby. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't." We're all looking at him like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, that's a little troubling.
Yeah, that's a little bit troubling. And he's just so undersized. I think people look at Hassan Reddick and say, well, he'll just be like Hassan Reddick. No, Hassan Reddick's an outlier. Typically, you're not very good at 235 pounds playing edge in this league. Are you starting to get concerned about Nolan Smith not being able to seize more snaps because they want that fourth rusher?
Yeah, John, and that's funny you mentioned that. I just wrote a story of certain storylines that really caught my attention the first half of the season for the Eagles, and establishing a fourth edge rusher to me was something that they need to figure out as we move forward. Nolan Smith, I'm interested to see if he carves out a more prominent role, but it doesn't seem likely right now. They've deactivated Derek Barnett. They've not played Patrick Johnson. Patrick Johnson hasn't factored into the defensive equation, but they still Nolan Smith was averaging 4 snaps a game. I think he played 9 the other day. I don't know how, if they think that, if they're worried about him wearing down and not being maybe as effective as they would like him to be in December and January, or if there is some wear and tear there that they don't want to make worse by putting him out there, or if he's simply just not somebody that they rely upon in these moments to rush. But he's somebody that you have to circle and say they need to get more out of him as the season advances.
Are they risking both Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick with as many snaps as they're taking? Because I know this is old school. I try and get my best players on the field as often as possible. I know that's not the NFL in 2023 where your best players play. You only go to the bench when somebody gets hurt. There's rotational substitutions in the NFL, but this is even the Eagles flying in the face of what they've done themselves over the last couple of years. And I'll only look at the Sirianni era. I won't even go back further than that. They like to move guys in and out on the defensive line. Are they taking a chance by playing Sweat and Reddick as much as they are?
Yeah, they absolutely are. And these guys, I think, are two of the Eagles' best defensive players through 9 games. I don't think that's a stretch to say that. And you want them to have as fresh legs as possible late in the season. That's not really no one has fresh legs late in the season, but what they're able to do is really alter the course of a game at a moment's notice. And you saw that with Josh Sweat against Dallas. The depth isn't there this year, Jody, and that really lends itself to this problem, and having them out there and log all these miles that they have. And you don't want to put Brandon Graham out there because he'd be the next guy out, and he's 35 years old, and you want him to be as fresh as he can be. Derek Barnett was a healthy scratch, and Nolan Smith is for whatever reason not out there, not ready to play. So that's why you're seeing this. But yeah, to answer your question, they absolutely are running the risk of tiring these guys out and wearing them down when you need them most.
Yep.
You mentioned all of some of the Eagles' great players on defense there, Andrew, mainly on the defensive front, but we've talked about Slay, and even though Bradberry hasn't been himself, I think we all know that's a pretty good player. They have a lot of good players on defense. The on-field leader of their defense is now going to be Nicholas Morrow, the Green Dots. Now, you know what I believe. I think I know what you believe. He should have already been the Green Dot. But there's this weird thing in the NFL. It's not a meritocracy. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. But long term, they want Nakobe Dean to be in that position, and they were going to give him every opportunity, and they kept winning games, so can't be too upset about it. But Nicholas Morrow has played better than Nakobe Dean this season. Are you concerned one iota that he is going to be the starting Mike linebacker for the foreseeable future?
This is a topic that you and I have discussed many a Sundays, John. The Eagles built all their plans about the second level. They built it around Nakobe Dean. But you and I always shared the same sentiment as to why. I get that you drafted him in the 3rd round, but what has he proven that you're putting all your eggs in that proverbial basket? And Nicholas Morrow has been the better player, definitively, starting from week 2. And yeah, Nakobe hasn't played a ton, but when he has been out there, you see a lot of growing pains. You don't see the dynamic player that many anticipate when he was drafted out of Georgia. But Nicholas Morrow is a really smart player. You talked about him wearing the green dot. I think the best pairing that the Eagles have at the second level, I know, is Zach Cunningham and Nicholas Morrow. They both bring something different. Zach Cunningham has been excellent, by the way. He's been their best linebacker this whole season. And they both bring something different. Zach is more of a tenacious, tough downhill player, and Nicholas Morrow is more of the instinctive, anticipatory player that can really get guys lined up on the second level. Are they going to have blemishes in pass coverage? Sure. They've had a hand in that back 7 pass coverage woes, but they give you the best chance of putting together, solidifying that second level.
If the worst case scenario crops up this weekend and either Morrow or Cunningham go down, who's coming off the bench?
And that's where it becomes interesting, because Christian Ellis, by default, Jody, would be the 3rd linebacker. But when Nakobe was out, he only accumulated 12 snaps in the interim. Cunningham and Morrow really don't leave the field. But I think out of necessity, you would have to see, who else do they really, you're not going to tap Ben Van Sumeren on the shoulder and say, go ahead and get out there. It would be Christian Ellis, I would imagine.
Yeah. And that, but you can't legislate injuries. You do have to hope Nick Morrow stays healthy. But yeah, then it starts to get, and I always bring up Doug Peterson. I asked him back in the day, what can ruin a season quickest? And he said multiple injuries at the same position. Well, if you lose Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow, you're in trouble. And I think that would be the case, but that's everywhere in the NFL. So
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of questions as to is there anybody out there on a practice squad or a free agent that the Eagles should look at. I don't like to speculate. I don't like to just throw names out there, but at this point in the season, they're out there for a reason. So they're not going to be a significant reinforcement or upgrade over what you already have there.
Now, if you have the mercenary market, which the Eagles kind of created, that's what I call it. Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh last season, Bradley Roby this season. Linval, by the way, out in Buffalo now, signed with the Bills. Maybe there's somebody out there I'm missing that can at least come in as a better. The Eagles did it early because, with Zach Cunningham and Miles Jack, and they hit one out of two, and Zach's done a tremendous job. So, but that's for desperation mode. If you suffer another injury, Nick Morrow has done nothing to be taken off that field, and everybody is looking at the sky, Andrew, and saying, "When is the other shoe going to drop?" Maybe the other shoe isn't going to drop. Here's my argument with Nick Morrow. He played okay behind the worst defensive front in football last year. Now he's behind the best defensive front. So maybe it makes sense that he's playing well. If he can hold up, yeah.
I mean, he's played fine in close games and blowout games. Like, he hasn't been overly exploited. So I think that he's checked off all the boxes. And you would think that he's answered most of the questions that some may have had.
You know what box he doesn't check off, though, Andrew and Jody? Money. And if you don't make money, people think you stink. And maybe the NFL just made a mistake. It's possible.
That happens.
The first one.
That happens too. And one thing that really stuck out to me, and John, you've been around him a lot as well, is just how smart he is. He's a really, really smart player. You don't just come off the practice squad for week 2, get issued the green dot without the defensive coordinator having a certain amount of trust in you to make sure that you're going to be able to carry out his assignments. So I think that really speaks to his football acumen.
And here's where I'll give the Eagles credit, but then also take it away. They signed Morrow before they signed Cunningham. They made the move to sign Morrow for a relatively inexpensive contract with no guaranteed money, but they did reach out and get him done first. They didn't take Cunningham until after the camp had already opened. So you look at them through two different lights. But then again, they did cut Nicholas Morrow, and he was out there for a week waiting to see if anybody else would put him on the 53-man roster point before he came back to that. Yeah, I'll go on the Eagles practice squad. So I want to give the Eagles credit because they made the early call on Morrow, and the level that he's played to, they should get credit for it. But then, of course, your fingers go, thanks for getting through the week of just deciding as to whether he's going to be somebody else's property or not.
Well, I'm sure there was an agreement there, and he probably looked at the linebacker landscape on the Eagles and said, I probably have a chance of getting elevated here at some point.
Yeah. Well,
hold on. What do you mean by there was an agreement there? An agreement when he came back that he was going to be elevated?
Well, there could have been. You have a wink. No, I think. Yeah. I talked to Nick. He was looking around. He wanted a 53. That's why there was a little bit of a lag. And he wanted to look for a 53-man roster spot.
As well he should.
Understandable. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. And then when it wasn't there, he was, he wasn't going to a different practice squad because he had already sort of ingratiated himself here. But yeah, the Eagles gambled with him. And they gambled correctly because other teams are like, we don't want him. And I think he's the 8th or 9th graded off-ball linebacker by PFF.
Pretty good.
Where's Zach Cunningham by
PFF?
By PFF
Zach's not as high. And a lot of things go into that. I think I'm with you. I think Zach has been their best linebacker, but it doesn't show it. But I think he's asked to do a little bit more than middle linebacker in this defense. Zach is still rock solid at 37, which is pretty good. And he's played almost 500 snaps.
Behind only Slay and Bradberry for the most snaps on the Eagles defense this year.
Yeah, well, yeah, corners don't come off the field until they get hurt. But and Zach has played well. I think Zach might be the biggest surprise if we're doing mid-season awards.
Yeah, I would say
best late signing, whatever award you want to give. Make
Zach,
up an award.
Zach Cunningham, and then you could also make a case for Blankenship. Although if you're in the camp of John or Andrew, and maybe you, Jody, we kind of thought that Reed was the awakening was imminent with Reed.
Yeah.
I always thought
player.
that he could
Reed's
play.
just a good player. Good.
Really is.
Yeah.
And he made a kind of important tackle this past week, getting Schoonmaker down at the half-yard line. That's a play we're going to look back at the end of the year and go, damn, what if he had leaned in and just a little bit more, and Brandon and Blankenship couldn't keep him out of the end zone. Could have had a serious outcome on the entire season. All right. I asked this of Paul Domwich when we had him on earlier. I'm going to ask it of you, Andrew. Who's going to cover Travis Kelce on Sunday? I know we're getting a week in advance, but at some point we're going to go, oh yeah, Chiefs this week. That has been a weakness of the Eagles. It is a strength of the Chiefs. It's a strength as compared to every other tight end in the league. How are they going to, at least as Dan Patrick likes to say, you can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. How are they going to contain Travis Kelce? We'll settle for contain Travis Kelce. How are they going to go about doing that?
You may remember a conversation you and I had, Jody. I believe it was right before the season when they moved Bradberry into the slot. And I told you that I didn't think it was permanent, but I thought that moves like that were made with covering a guy like a Darren Waller twice a year and covering Travis Kelce's and George Kittle's and players of that mold. So that, to me, Jody, I'm still sticking with that. I think
they're revisiting that.
I think they may revisit that, and I think Bradberry would give them the best chance at perhaps slowing down. You're never going to, like you said, you can only hope to contain them, but I think that would be their best.
Johnny Mac, didn't I hear somewhere in the last 10 or 15 minutes, Bradberry's having a real bad year?
Well,
I think Andrew is the guy who just said that to me within the last 15 minutes.
Wow,
he's having a rough season, but he'd be covering a tight end versus being on the outside and covering up a guy down the field.
If James has got something.
Yeah, Brad. Let's be clear. Bradberry is still a good player.
Yeah,
I'm not. He is. It's just going through a rough patch, as a lot of players do.
You know what? I might throw Sidney Brown at. I say, you know what, Sid? This is your game, buddy.
Could be, but there's a big height advantage there for Kelce.
Yeah. Well, you're always going to have a mismatch, but
Bradberry's a little bit longer. He's seen a lot. He's probably
definitely
he's
smarter.
He's very wise. He's very wise.
He's very. The problem is James is so wise. I think he convinced the coaching staff, I don't want to play inside.
Yeah, he probably said, I'm done with that.
I think that's what's going on. But last one, at Andrew DiCecco. Make sure you follow Andrew on X. Does a tremendous job covering this team for InsideTheBirds.com. One of the smartest football guys, I think you can see it in town.
Thanks, man.
We talked, since it's midseason. I mentioned midseason awards. We all talked about who was going to be better, Brian Johnson or Sean Desai. I get this weird feeling because of the expectations on the offense that everybody's down on Brian Johnson. I think Brian has been phenomenal.
Me too.
Phenomenal.
So do I.
Sean has been good. I think he's been good, but there's more holes you can pick at on the defensive side and say mention some of the explosive plays. Maybe it's just personnel related. But I think more people think Sean's doing a good job, and Brian's like, they don't do this, they don't do that. Do you get that same feel?
Yeah, I do, and I try to educate as to why I think Brian's been tremendous as well. But I would also look at Sean Desai, and you've seen the rough patch on the defense, but I thought by and large he's done a really good job of putting players in position to be successful. You're seeing the development of a guy like Reed Blankenship. You're seeing the nurturing of a young player like Eli Ricks, who really was buried on the depth chart. He wasn't even active for week 1, and yet he's playing critical snaps out of necessity. But I think that he long-term will be an outside corner for this team. You're seeing some developmental pieces there. So I think Desai's done a nice job also.
All right. There's a reason why. I don't know if John was specifically pointing to me, because I don't think I've said this, but he read me right. I think Desai's had a better year for one reason and one reason only. Key injuries on the offense of the Eagles. Cam Jerkins, period. End of paragraph. Key injuries on the defense, the Philadelphia Eagles. Do I need to go through the list of 12? It's just one after the other after the other. They've had more injuries at one position, slot corner, than they have on the entire offense.
Well, now we have Dallas. Now, obviously, that just happened. And don't forget,
right, you're asking me today. They haven't played without Dallas yet.
No, I'm joking. Because
now that's what's going to be
joking.
That's what's going to be interesting to see how they find a third option in the passing attack.
I know I get Jody going.
You made me spit up my coffee. Yo, the fear of Quez Watkins going deep. Oh my God, how it hasn't pulled the Eagles' offense to a screeching halt is still beyond my means of comprehension.
The awakening of Jack Stoll. The awakening of Jack Stoll.
Yes,
we shall see. Yeah, I'm cutting Desai.
I think they both done a good job, but I think Brian has been tremendous,
and especially later as he's gotten more comfortable, it's really apparent to me. I agree.
Yeah, I'll grade on a curve and say they've both been good. They both get passing grades. They both have achieved more than I'll give it. I thought it was an issue coming into the season. New coordinators could be questionable. I think they both get thumbs up. I'll say I think Desai's actually done a better job because I think his job has been much harder with the amount of injuries that the Eagles have had. Andrew, always a pleasure, brother. Appreciate you greatly. Since you're well dressed and warmed, I would go on outside and rake some leaves or something. Get some work in, buddy.
Appreciate you guys. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com and the podcast. All right, Mac coming back. We need to put a bow on the show. It's a football Friday. Yeah, but no Eagles on Sunday. What the hell we're going to do with ourselves this weekend? We'll talk about it when we come back here on Birds 365.